The vast silence of space hung like a cold shroud over the edge of the regal expanse, where the shattered remains of the Zorathian fleet drifted in slow, helpless arcs. Once a proud armada of silver-blue warships, they now resembled broken toys scattered across the stars, hulls ruptured, lights flickering, oxygen bleeding into the void. Commander Exilvar, whose smooth violet skin was smeared with coolant and blood, stood motionless on the cracked bridge of the flagship Vornaxis, eyes locked on the holographic display of his dying fleet. The Drexta Dominion had come without warning, rising from the dark like a phantom storm, their angular ships cutting through Zorathian defenses as if they were paper. It wasn't a battle, it had been a slaughter. Systems across the fleet were collapsing, engines were offline, shields were gone, and distress signals had gone unanswered for hours. Their allies in the Council of Galactic Accord had fallen silent, unwilling to draw the Drex's wrath. Every moment dragged heavier than the last, the silence so complete it felt like the galaxy itself had turned its back. Selvar knew this was the end, not just for his fleet, but possibly for his people. Still, with a stubborn flick of his mandibles, he activated the long-range distress beacon and opened all frequencies, pouring a desperate message into the void, knowing full well that no one would answer. "This is Commander Excelvar of the Zorathian Alliance. We are under attack. We request immediate aid." I repeat then, something happened. The signal returned a ping. Static crackled across the channel, followed by a low voice speaking in a harsh guttural tongue none of the linguistic software could identify. The crew exchanged startled glances as the voice repeated a short phrase again and again. Slowly, the translator began to adapt, and the phrase took shape in Standard Galactic. "This is the U.A.S. Valkyrie. We got your signal. Sit tight." The bridge fell into stunned silence. Selvar stepped forward, barely believing the translation. He ordered the communications officer to request identification to confirm they weren't hearing an echo or hallucination born of stress. The voice returned, clearer this time, sharp with confidence. "United Earthship Valkyrie. Terran origin. We're en route to your position. ET of 5 minutes. Terrans. Humans. A primitive species the galaxy had written off as unpredictable, aggressive, and isolationist. They were the last ones anyone expected to show up, especially here, especially now. The Zorathians had read the reports. Earth had been avoided in trade routes, dismissed in diplomacy, left alone in peace because of their history of violent evolution and chaotic innovation. Yet, here they were. The crew watched as the sensors detected a single, medium-class vessel emerging from hyperspace. It didn't look impressive. No glowing energy cores, no sleek hull plating, no elegant curves, just a brutish, angular ship with a nameplate etched into scorched alloy, Valkyrie. It moved with uncanny speed, angling through the debris like a predator among sheep. The crew of the Vornaxis scrambled to run diagnostics. How had a Terran ship crossed such distance so quickly? Why were they here? What did they want? Suspicion fought with hope in the eyes of every Zorathian on the bridge. Then the Terrans hailed them again. "Commander Exilvar, we see you. Your ship's in bad shape. We'll patch you up." No demand for compensation. No mention of alliances. Just an offer of help. A human face flickered onto the screen, dark-haired, scarred, smiling with a kind of reckless confidence that Exilvar couldn't read. "Name's Commander Elias Trent," the human said. "I heard you're having Drex trouble. Mind if we crash the party?" For a moment, Exilvar couldn't answer. Then, without knowing why, he let out a dry chuckle. "Permission granted," he said. The Terran ship darted closer, extending tractor beams and sending repair drones before even docking. The machines moved fast, patching leaks, restoring oxygen, even realigning comms arrays. Their technology was mismatched, raw, and ugly but terrifyingly effective. Within minutes, basic life support was stabilized, and emergency lighting flared back to life. It wasn't elegance, it was survival. The Zorathian crew, many still treating burns and injuries, watched in disbelief as the Terrans worked without fear, shouting strange slang, laughing as they ripped apart panels and replaced wiring by hand. "They act like they've done this 1,000 times," whispered the Zorathian engineer. "They probably have," said Exelvar, eyes never leaving the human ship. Then the sensors shrieked again. A new threat emerged: 3 Drex patrol vessels entering the system, scanning for survivors. Selvar's mandibles clicked in panic. "They're back," someone said. "We need to flee." But Trent's voice cut in over the comms before Exelvar could speak. "Let 'em come. We were hoping they'd show." Selvar turned to the screen. "Commander Trent, those ships are Drex hunter killers, heavily armed. You must leave now." But the human only smirked, eyes gleaming. "We didn't come this far to run, Commander. Sit back. Let humanity show you what we do best." And as the Drex ships powered weapons and closed in, the Valkyrie spun like a blade in the dark, engines flaring blue-hot, systems coming alive with a kind of organized chaos the Zorathians had never seen. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The U.A.I.S. Valkyrie moved through the battlefield like a ghost with fire in its engines, its dark metal hull cutting a sharp contrast against the burning remains of the Zorathian fleet. And as it reached the crippled flagship Vornaxis, Commander Elias Trent stood on his bridge, arms folded, gaze steady as he watched the data scroll across the screens, life signs weak, oxygen low, systems barely holding together. But they were still alive, and that was enough for him. He gave the order to dock, and his crew, humans in worn uniforms, their faces marked by long service and short sleep, rushed to work with a speed that shocked the Zorathians, who had never seen anything like it. Within minutes, boarding tubes hissed open, and human engineers moved through the alien corridors of the Vornaxis as if it were their own ship, dragging tool crates, cutting panels open, and shouting back and forth in a strange mixture of slang and laughter that made the Zorathian officers stare in disbelief, not knowing whether these strange beings were fearless or mad, maybe both. Commander Exelvar, bruised and exhausted, limped to the main corridor, expecting an army of wild creatures, but instead found a tall human woman with grease on her face and a datapad in her hand, barking orders to her team while checking Zorathian schematics as if she'd studied them for years. And when she noticed him, she simply nodded and said, "Nice ship, Commander." Bit fried, but we'll get her breathing again. And before he could reply, she was already gone, shouting something about reverse jury rigging a coolant loop before it backfires, whatever that meant. Exelvar didn't understand their technology, their language, or their attitude, but he understood this. They were here to help, and they weren't afraid. Still, questions gnawed at his mind. Why would the Terrans risk their ship for strangers, especially in Drex territory, and how had they gotten here? So fast, faster than any ally he'd ever known, faster than council ships, faster even than Drex scouts. His thoughts were interrupted by another message from the Valkyrie, and this time it was Trent himself on the screen, his scarred face calm, his tone light. "We're boosting your shields and giving you 10 hours of breathable air," he said. "After that, you'll need your own systems online. Can your people work with ours?" And Exelvar, still trying to process how these humans functioned, simply nodded and replied, "Yes. We will adapt," which earned him a sharp smile from Trent, who said, "Good." Because the Drex don't give second chances, and then the screen went dark. Tension returned as the Zorathian sensors detected movement: 3 Drex patrol ships entering the system, heading straight toward the debris field, and panic rippled through the bridge of the Vornaxis. The Drex weren't known for mercy, and everyone knew what happened to survivors: interrogation, dissection, erasure. But as the Zorathians braced for death, the Valkyrie turned with surprising grace, positioning itself between the Drex and the wounded ships. Like a lone wolf staring down a pack of predators, Exelvar reached out to Trent again, his voice urgent, warning him that those ships outmatched even Zorathian cruisers. That retreat was the only hope, but Trent answered with a chuckle and said, "You still don't get it, do you? We're not here to run. We're here to fight." And with that, human weapons powered up missile bays opening, point defense guns unfolding, energy capacitors glowing a deep, ominous red, though nothing looked polished or elegant. In fact, the ship's entire design seemed messy, like it had been repaired 1,000 times with scrap and spite, yet something about it felt dangerous, more than its size or strength should allow. The Drex ships finally arrived, sleek and perfect, moving in a perfect triangle formation, sending a standard warning signal demanding surrender. But the Valkyrie didn't respond with words, it responded with fire. In a sudden burst of movement, the Terran ship spun forward, launching a swarm of decoy drones while slipping beneath the Drex formation, firing a cluster of EMP torpedoes that scrambled sensors and fried targeting systems. And before the Drex could react, the Valkyrie released grappler pods that slammed into the hull of the nearest ship, pulling it off course and crashing it into a floating wreck. Explosions rippled across the debris field. Metal screamed in space, and the Zorathians watched in silent awe as the humans fought like creatures born for war, not with raw power, but with speed, surprise, and sheer madness. When the second Drex ship opened fire, the Valkyrie ducked and weaved through the blasts, taking damage but never slowing, striking back with kinetic slugs and arc plasma, bypassing shields by guessing where weak spots would appear before they even formed, guessing and being right every time. One by one, the Drex ships fell into disarray. Their formation shattered, their movements panicked, and as the final ship tried to retreat, a small Terran boarding craft detached from the Valkyrie, moving fast and low, attaching to the fleeing vessel's hull like a parasite, cutting in and vanishing inside. Moments later, the Drex ship went dark, and when it powered up again, it reversed course and returned. Now under human control, Commander Trent's face appeared once more on Excelvar's screen, smeared with sweat and oil, grinning as he said, "Ship secured. Got their codes, got their maps, got their plans. I think you're going to want to see this." And before Excelvar could speak, he felt something shift inside him, not just relief or gratitude, but something deeper, a sense that the universe had changed, that this strange, reckless species called humanity had just tipped the scales in a war far greater than this single battle. And as the Valkyrie returned to their side, triumphant yet battle-scarred, the Zorathian crew finally understood. The humans weren't just survivors, they were Stormbringers. And the Drex had just made their first real mistake. The silence after the battle was heavy, but it didn't last long, because the Drex never gave up that easily, and both the humans and Zorathians knew it, while the damaged Zorathian fleet drifted slowly toward recovery under the protection of the UAES Valkyrie. Alarms began to blare once again, and new signals lit up the tactical displays. 3 more Drex cruisers, heavier than the last ones, were closing in fast, and this time they weren't scouts or patrols, they were warships, and they weren't looking for prisoners, they were here to erase what was left. Commander Elias Trent stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed, reading the data with calm precision, while his crew moved around him like a tightly wound machine. Loading torpedoes, rerouting power, sinking targeting arrays, every step done with a confidence that came not from superiority, but from experience. The kind of experience earned in long, bloody fights where you either got clever or got dead. Across the screen, Commander Excelvar watched with growing tension from the bridge of the Vornaxis, its systems barely stable, its weapons still offline, and though he wanted to help, he knew his fleet was in no shape to fight this battle would be the humans alone, and he wondered if even their strange tactics could handle what was coming. The Drex ships came into view sleek, dark, and merciless, their triangular hulls glowing with internal power, their weapons hot and ready, and still, the Valkyrie didn't move. Trent waited, letting them draw closer, ignoring the warning tones and the rising concern from his officers until they were almost in range, and then he gave the quietest of orders, "Execute burn pattern echo." Suddenly, the Valkyrie exploded into motion, thrusters firing in a rapid spin that flung the ship sideways while releasing a cluster of mines, each one armed with magnetic traps and seismic disruptors that latched onto enemy hulls and sent shockwaves through the structure. One of the Drex ships flinched sideways, firing wildly, hitting nothing but empty space, while the second one tried to target the Valkyrie's path, only to have the human ship vanish behind a burst of heat flares. Then came the missiles, 5 at once, each flying erratic paths that made Drex defenses struggle to lock on, and when they hit, the result wasn't fire or explosion, but high-frequency pulses that blinded the Drex sensor arrays, forcing them to fight half-blind in A battlefield that humans now controlled. Trent's voice echoed through his ship as he called for the next phase, and the crew responded without hesitation, launching interceptor drones and pulse cannons targeting joints and seams in the Drex armor that most species didn't even notice. From the sidelines, the Zorathians could only watch in disbelief as the humans fought like something ancient and wild, moving with no pattern, no elegance, just raw instinct and precision, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could strike back. The Drex, built on logic and order, couldn't adapt. They were too rigid, too predictable, and that was their mistake, because humans were anything but predictable. Then the largest Drex ship locked onto the Valkyrie with its main weapon, charging it. Beam powerful enough to split an asteroid in two, and for a brief second, everything seemed to stop as the energy built up, light gathering at the core of the weapon like a second sun, and Trent did not run. He waited calmly, counting aloud, 3, 2 now, and just as the beam fired, the Valkyrie dropped below it, releasing a decoy pod that mimicked its energy signature, drawing the blast away while the real ship looped beneath the Drex vessel and launched a boarding spike and armored drill carrying a human squad straight into the enemy ship's lower decks. The spike hit with a thunderous crash, and seconds later, explosions lit up the Drex hull from within as the boarding team fought their way through corridors, planting charges and hacking systems. Zorathian eyes widened as data began to stream, and the humans weren't just fighting. They were taking the ship from the inside, one hallway at a time. Meanwhile, outside, the remaining two Drex cruisers regrouped, trying to flank the Valkyrie, but the human ship refused to give them a target, spinning and weaving, using debris from earlier battles as cover, bouncing signals off the wreckage to confuse enemy tracking, and then, just when the Drex thought they had the ship cornered, the Valkyrie turned and flew directly at them, guns blazing, ramming straight through the gap between their formations, releasing plasma charges that detonated in the narrow space and sent both Drex ships spiraling off course. Back on the first Drex ship, the human boarding team reached the core chamber, and with a final blast, blew out the reactor's safety systems, forcing the ship to shut down or detonate, and a moment later, Trent's voice crackled over the comms, package secured. Pulling out now, and the boarding team evacuated just as the reactor went critical and the Drex cruiser burst into flames, with only 2 ships left, and one of them heavily damaged. The remaining Drex forces began to retreat, but not before the Valkyrie locked onto the crippled one and transmitted a simple message: next time, bring more ships. Before launching a final salvo that tore the enemy vessel apart, silence returned, broken only by the quiet buzz of recovery systems powering up aboard the Vornaxis, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then Exilvar reached out to Trent, his voice filled with something close to awe, asking how his people had learned to fight like that, and Trent simply leaned back in his seat and said, "We didn't learn. We adapted. That's what humans do when we have no other choice." And Exilvar, who had once believed his people were the most advanced in the sector, now saw the truth: technology mattered, ships mattered, but the real weapon was will, and no one seemed to have more of it than these Terrans. As the stars settled back into their silent dance and the debris of battle drifted past, the Zorathians began to understand something that the Drex were only now discovering: humanity was not just another species in the galaxy. It was a storm waiting to be unleashed. In the quiet that followed the battle, as wreckage drifted and systems were slowly repaired, the crew of the UAS Valkyrie and the Zorathian survivors finally had a moment to breathe. But the peace didn't last long, because the data pulled from the captured Drex ship revealed something much darker than anyone expected. Deep inside the enemy logs was a coded archive marked with a Dominion seal, a symbol that hadn't been seen in years, not since the great powers signed the non-expansion treaty that was supposed to prevent another galactic war. When Commander Elias Trent saw that mark, his expression changed, his usual calm slipping into something cold and focused, and he ordered immediate decryption, calling his top tech officer, Lieutenant Ramey, to crack the file before the Drex could realize what had been stolen. While the decryption program worked, the Valkyrie hovered silently near the damaged Zorathian fleet, acting like a shadow guardian, and on the Vornaxis, Commander Exilvar watched the humans with growing respect and unease, because though they had saved his people, there was something dangerous in the way they operated, something relentless, as if every battle was just another page in a much larger book that only they were reading. When the file finally opened, Raimi froze, eyes wide as lines of text and old schematics scrolled across her screen, showing maps of hidden installations, strange energy signatures, and a single line that made her call Trent immediately. Dominion Project 47. Subjugation Protocol Human Trials, approved. Trent read it 3 times, then told Raimi to isolate the file and lock it under highest encryption. But it was too late. Excelvar had seen it, too, and his voice came over the comms, filled with disbelief and a quiet horror as he asked, why would the Drek have files about human experimentation? And Trent didn't answer right away because he already had a theory, one he didn't want to speak aloud, one that reached back to Earth's early days in space, when humans were still climbing out of their atmosphere and rumors spread of alien ships watching from the dark. Raimi dug deeper, pulling images from the archive, photos of broken humans in cages, strange symbols carved into walls, names of planets no one recognized, and all of it stamped with Dominion clearance. Level so high even Trent had never seen them before. Then came the final piece, a transmission log from a Drex general to an unknown receiver, stating that the Terran spark must be extinguished before they awaken the old flame, and Trent's heart sank because now he knew what the Drex feared wasn't just humanity's technology or tactics. It was something older, buried, something that had once made humans the center of a forgotten war, a war erased from records and memory. Excelvar demanded answers, and Trent gave them, slowly and carefully, revealing what little Earth knew about the Dominion, a shadow empire that had once ruled with unseen hands, manipulating entire systems, vanishing without explanation centuries ago, and now it seemed still watching from the void. The Drex weren't just conquerors, they were agents of something bigger, and humanity's rise had triggered alarms in places no one even knew existed. Suddenly, the mission had changed. This wasn't about saving a fleet anymore, or winning battles. It was about uncovering the truth of what humanity really was, and why the galaxy seemed so desperate to suppress it. Trent ordered the Valkyrie to set a course for the nearest Dominion marker found in the file, a dead system called Selar 9, once thought to be a mining world but now revealed to hold something beneath its surface. And Excelvar insisted on coming, bringing a skeleton crew aboard the Vornaxis, now barely spaceworthy but determined to stand with the humans who had saved them. The journey through warp space was tense, the crew quiet as they passed ancient waypoints and listened for signals that didn't belong. And as they approached Selar 9, all sensors went dark. The system had a blackout field, a strange interference that jammed communications, scrambled scans, and made it feel like they were flying blind into a trap. Still, Trent pressed on, guiding the Valkyrie with skill born of years in hostile zones, until the planet appeared gray and lifeless, its surface marked with scars that did not look natural, like something had tried to erase what was once there. They descended slowly, avoiding ancient defense satellites that still twitched now and then, as if trying to wake from long sleep. And when they landed, the surface crew moved out Trent, Raimi, Excelvar, and a small team of armed explorers. They found ruins, metal structures half buried in ash, doors that opened to no one, and deep tunnels that led down into the planet's heart, where the real secrets lay. In the lowest chamber, they found a vault, sealed by symbols that matched those in the Drex file, and when Raimi cracked it open, cold air rushed out, followed by a low hum like a sleeping engine returning to life. Inside, they found not weapons, but records, thousands of them, encoded in crystalline walls, showing the history of an ancient alliance that once included humans, Drex, and others long gone. Controlled by a Dominion council that ruled through silence and fear, one file stood out, a log labeled Genesis Variant, Human Alpha, and it showed early humans not as primitives, but as engineered hybrids, created for adaptability, endurance, emotion, all traits the Dominion could not control. When the experiment failed to break human will, the project was hidden, Earth was left isolated, and history was rewritten. Now, humanity's return to the stars had triggered old fail-safes, and the Drex were trying to finish what the Dominion started before humans could awaken the part of themselves designed for something more. Trent stood in that vault, staring at a single sentence glowing in pale blue across the wall. When the fire returns, the void will tremble, And he knew then that everything had changed. The battles so far were just warnings, and the real war hadn't even begun. The moment they stepped out of the vault, everything changed above them. Space shimmered unnaturally, as if reality itself was being pulled apart, and a signal screamed across every channel. Not a message, but a presence, ancient and cold, something that recognized what had just been awakened deep. Inside Cellar 9, Trent stood still for a moment, his hand gripping the rail of the landing ramp, watching the sky ripple with growing unease. And then his voice cut through the rising panic in both crews. Everyone back to the ships now. No one argued, not even Exilvar, whose own people moved with fear on their faces for the first time since the Drex attack, as the team raced through the dying ruins toward the surface. The air turned heavy, buzzing with low-energy pulses that made the ground shiver beneath their boots, and by the time they reached the Valkyrie, the stars had vanished behind a curtain of black metal ships, hundreds of them, rising from the edges of the system like a forgotten storm returning home, and on each hull was a mark that hadn't been seen in living memory, the Dominion sigil, glowing red against the dark. Inside the Valkyrie, Trent took his seat without a word, already giving orders, already moving his ship into a defense pattern, while Raimi screamed that the Dominion fleet had come from nowhere, no warp trail, no energy signature, as if they had been hiding in another layer of space entirely. Watching, waiting for the vault to open, the Vornaxis, still barely operational, struggled to get off the ground, and Trent didn't hesitate. He ordered the Valkyrie to fire a tether beam, pulling the Zorthian vessel into orbit just as the first wave of Dominion drones descended like locusts, moving with mechanical precision, no voices, no commands, only pure, brutal programming. The Valkyrie responded with everything it had: torpedoes, plasma bursts, anti-drone flares, but it wasn't enough, because for every drone they destroyed, 3 more took its place, and soon the hull was shaking, lights flickering as the ship's systems were pushed beyond design limits. Inside the war room, Raimi found the second layer of the Dominion archive, unlocked by the Vault's exposure, and in it was the truth they had feared. Humanity wasn't just a failed experiment, it was a weapon left unfinished, a species designed to grow stronger through loss, to adapt faster under threat, and most of all, to survive. When every law of nature said it shouldn't, the Dominion had tried to erase them, not because they were dangerous now, but because of what they might become, something not even the Dominion could control. Trent made a choice, then, one no human commander had ever made before he gave Raimi permission to activate the core protocol buried deep within the Valkyrie's systems, a last resort linked to Earth's forgotten satellite array known as the Ember Grid, a relic of ancient war tech powered by solar forges that hadn't burned in decades. The signal burst from the Valkyrie like lightning, stretching through subspace, reaching out toward Earth and the old relay stations scattered across human colonies. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then the stars pulsed, one by one, as the Ember Grid came online, sending back energy beams so powerful they tore through the veil of Dominion stealth and lit up the entire sector. Across the galaxy, human ships hidden, experimental, long dormant, came alive, rising from moons and stations, their crews awakened by emergency codes they didn't know still existed. And within hours, the Valkyrie was no longer alone. The Dominion fleet turned to face this new threat, and for the first time, it faltered, not because of numbers, but because it recognized something in these Terran warships, something older than fear. As human reinforcements engaged the Dominion vessels, space burned with energy fire, and Trent realized the final battle wasn't about territory or politics, it was about history catching up with itself. Exilvar, still aboard the Vornaxis, transmitted what he could to the Zorthian High Command, warning them that the war they thought was over had only just begun, and humanity was at the center of it. The Valkyrie broke formation and headed straight for the Dominion flagship, a giant fortress ship shaped like a crescent moon, its core pulsing with dark matter energy, and Trent led the charge himself, taking his ship through its shields using coordinates stolen from the Cellar 9 vault. An act so reckless, so human, the Dominion didn't anticipate it. Once inside, a boarding party stormed the control deck, fighting through walls of drones and strange biomechanical guardians that seemed to shift shape with every hit. But the humans pressed on, driven not by orders, but by something deeper, a spark that couldn't be programmed or predicted. Trent reached the central control node and placed a charge designed not to destroy, but to transmit a final message to the entire sector, exposing the Dominion's lies. History erased. The experiments done in shadows, and the truth of what humanity really was, the charge activated, and with it, a pulse of truth swept across the stars, reaching every ship, every station, every listening ear, and in its wake came chaos, confusion, and then something stronger, unity, because species once divided by fear now saw the real enemy, and they began to rise. As the Dominion flagship began to collapse from internal overload, Trent and his team barely escaped, diving back into the Valkyrie, which shot out of the explosion trailing fire, but alive. The Dominion fleet began to scatter, leaderless, exposed, and though the battle wasn't fully over, something had shifted in the galaxy. The silence had been broken, the past unearthed, and now all eyes were on Earth, not as a backwater planet, but as the source of something ancient, powerful, and unbreakable. Exelvar watched it unfold with silent awe, realizing that the galaxy had been wrong about humans. They weren't just survivors, they were fire given form, and when fire fights fire, only the stronger flame survives.